Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year-ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the zodiac sign of Virgo for the entire year of 2025. So my horoscopes are primarily designed for those that have either their sun sign in Virgo or their rising sign in Virgo, and I'm going to give kind of a big picture overview of the next 12 months and some of the major transits and themes that you can expect from the coming year. All right, so let's jump right into it. So here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year, which shows some of the areas of activity that are going to be happening in your chart at different times during the course of the year. So here's some of the major things I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to go through roughly chronologically, but I'm also going to try to prioritize those transits that are the most important. And here are some specific dates that you can refer back to later for some of the transits that I'm referring to in terms of the timeframes in which they'll take place. All right, so let's jump into the very first transit. So I wanted to talk first about the Mars retrograde that recently started, which is taking place in your 12th house of enemies and people that you don't get along with, as well as your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So Mars in December, in the first few days of January, is going to be retrograde in your 12th house of enemies. And sometimes there's people that we don't get along with in our life that we come into conflict with. And this may be one of those times where you're just not getting along with certain people in your life. There could be certain people that are trying to undermine you or who don't have your best interests in mind. And sometimes when you have a Mars retrograde transit like this, it can really bring those tensions to a head and force you to address or confront those things in some way. Sometimes you have to stand up to certain people if they are, doing things that are not okay. So that's really just December and the first week of January. And then for most of the first 4 months of 2025, Mars actually retrogrades back into your 11th house of friends and groups. So this may create a connection between that topic of enemies that we were just talking about, and for some reason the topic of friends and alliances at the same time. So sometimes when Mars goes retrograde in our 11th house, it can indicate a period in which we're not getting along with our friends as well as we used to. Sometimes there can be like conflicts or verbal altercations with friends. And in some instances, you may find that there's a friendship that has outlived its sort of shelf life, basically, at this point, and may depart from your life at this time. So sometimes that can be something that happens externally to you, but other times it can be an internal choice that you make yourself, where perhaps there's somebody that's like, really not taking care of you, not being a good friend, or doesn't have your best interests in mind. And in some instances, you have to cut certain things out of your life in order to move forward. And in the first 4 months of this year, that may be something that's really on your mind and something that's really necessary. So that's the start of the year for the first 4 months, roughly. And that's kind of the, let's say, bad news, so to speak. The good news is that in June, for the entire second half of the year, the planet Jupiter is going to move from your 10th house of career, where it's giving you very positive career transits from the second half of 2024 through the first half of 2025. So Jupiter is indicating a period of growth and expansion for your career. It should be a period of luck or success when it comes to that area of your life. And Jupiter is going to move in June into your 11th house of friends and groups. So whatever conflict was stirred up in the first 4 months of the year, whatever separations or dissension or like whatever dust was kicked up at the beginning of the year by Mars, Jupiter is going to come through and kind of sweep things up and reconcile and unify things to make things better than they were in the first part of the year. So this is actually a very positive transit. If you went through a period of like losing a friendship earlier in the year, you're going to go through a period of gaining new friends by the second half of 2025 and into the first half of 2026. And generally, it's just going to be a very positive and like optimistic time for not just friendship, but also building alliances or working with groups of people for a larger ideal or purpose. So that's a great transit in the second half of the year. Moving on, I want to talk about the eclipses, which are shifting to your first house and seventh house axis, because we're starting to have the eclipses move into Virgo and into Pisces, which is your first house of self and your seventh house of relationships. So this means there's going to be a major period over the course of the next couple of years that eclipses will be bouncing back and forth between those two sectors of your chart, where the main theme is going to be major beginnings and major endings when it comes to relationships and when it comes to your personal sense of self and some of the things that go along with that, which includes your body and your physical vitality, and in some instances, your appearance, but also your mind and your attitude towards your sense of self and identity and who you are in this world. So major beginnings and major endings in that area. What usually happens is it opens up a period of going back and forth in 6-month increments, where sometimes a person is like super focused on relationships. And in some instances, there can be some relationships that have reached the end of their life cycle and may come to an end at this point. Like especially personal one-on-one relationships, which can be either romantic relationships or also sometimes business partnerships. There's some relationships that may come to an end at this time or the end of a chapter, but there's other relationships that are actually going to start at this time. And what happens with eclipses is that when eclipses take place in the seventh house, sometimes you'll meet somebody and it'll be like laying the seeds for a new relationship, but usually it's not very evident at first. Like you don't know right away how significant that relationship's going to be in the long run. But usually when relationships start under eclipses, you realize in retrospect that was actually a big deal, meeting that person or starting that interaction with them. So pay attention to that. Other things going on, Saturn and Neptune are departing from your seventh house of relationships, and they're moving into your eighth house, which has to do with other people's money and finances. So this is good because Saturn starting to depart from your seventh house is going to remove some restrictions and some obstacles that have been coming up over the past couple of years when it comes to relationships, where you may have struggled with that part of your life a little bit more than at other times when Saturn's transiting your seventh house. Additionally, Neptune departing from your seventh house is positive because then it's going to remove some nebulousness or some lack of clarity that you may have been experiencing in relationships or when it comes to partnership over the course of the past decade, roughly since 2011, since that was when Neptune first moved into your seventh house. So this is the beginning of the end of a long set of transits of those two planets through your seventh house that's not entirely over, but in 2025, we're going to experience the first taste of what it's like to not have those two planets transiting through that sector of your chart that you've had in a while. So starting around the middle of the year, starting around April, May, June, Saturn and Neptune are going to move into your eighth house, and the eighth house usually represents the role that money and possessions owned by other people, what role that plays in your life. So sometimes that can relate to if you have a partner or if you're married, it can indicate some major shifts when it comes to your partner's finances. So since it is a Saturn transit, your partner could be running into some issues or obstacles when it comes to financial matters, or there could be something about your shared resources together where there's a surmountable difficulty that comes up that you have to work through or overcome in some way. There may be some nebulousness to this because Neptune is moving into the eighth house at the same time. So there may be some tension between really struggling to figure out like what's real versus what's not real, or what is being overly pessimistic about financial matters versus being overly idealistic, perhaps. That's part of the basic tension between Saturn and Neptune transits, and that's going to be really prominent for you, especially in the middle of this year, around the summertime, like around July, when those two planets get very close together right at the beginning of your eighth house. So that'll be something to pay attention to, because that'll be kind of like a preview of some longer-term transits that are going to take place over the course of the next several years as those two planets move through that sector of your chart and move through your eighth house. All right, so that's one major thing. There's also the last eclipse in Aries, which is also your eighth house. So you've been having eclipses in the financial sector of your chart over the course of the past year or so that have been bouncing back and forth between your eighth house of your personal finances and your eighth house of other people's money. So it may be that some of these financial things that are being brought into the picture by the transit of Saturn and Neptune, that there was already a lead into that by these eclipses over the course of the past year, where there's been major beginnings and major endings when it comes to the role of your personal finances and possessions and the role of other people's money in your life. So sometimes this can bring into your life themes having to do with like debt, taxes, inheritance. Sometimes mortality in general can come up with eighth house transits and just the role of mortality in your life in general. This shouldn't be, because this is the last of a series of eclipses that have been happening in this sector of your chart, I would expect this to be the continuation of something rather than something that's completely brand new, although it is interesting that this is coinciding with a bunch of transits through your eighth house around this time. So that's the last eclipse in your eighth house that's going to occur around the March-April timeframe. And right around the same time, Venus is actually going to station retrograde in your eighth house of shared resources, and it's going to retrograde back into your seventh house of relationships. So this is happening amidst all the other eighth house stuff. So again, it may bring into focus the role of shared resources, and especially your partner or business partners' financial dealings come into focus at this time. And with Venus going retrograde, there may be things from the past that you have to revisit, or there may be things that you have to review in terms of your financial obligations with other people. Since this is a Venus retrograde in your seventh house, the focus of that Venus retrograde is really going to be on relationships especially. So there may be some past relationships from earlier in your life, or some person who comes back into your life at this time where there's some relationship that you have to revisit. So sometimes this can be like resuming an old relationship and getting back together with somebody from your past. Other times it can be just going back and reviewing past relationships and reflecting on them, but not necessarily going back to that person if you decide that going back into the past wouldn't suit you. But you can still go through a process of like internalizing and reflecting and just reviewing things during this time around the springtime when Venus is going to go retrograde. For those of you with night charts, though, that should actually be very positive. And I think the combination of Saturn temporarily departing from your seventh house and Venus retrograding back and stationing direct in your seventh house of relationships probably indicates an important relationship turning point for you in the spring of this year that should be quite positive. So that's actually something to look forward to. All right, finally, the last transit I wanted to talk about is the planet Uranus, which has been transiting through your 10th house of career over the past 6 years now, since 2018. The planet Uranus, actually, no, I take that back. This is Virgo rising. So we're talking about the planet Uranus, which has been going through your 10th house, your 9th house of education and belief and philosophy and foreign travel. So Uranus has been going through that sector of your chart since 2018, and it's probably been causing some radical shifts in your beliefs, in your outlook on life, in your personal philosophy. It may have exposed you to different countries and different people from different cultures, people with different educational backgrounds with you. And it's generally probably been somewhat revolutionary when it comes to your personal beliefs and outlook on life. So that transit, we're getting towards the tail end of it. And this year, starting in July, Uranus is going to dip into Gemini, which is your 10th house of career. And that's going to be the very beginning of a 7-year-long transit of Uranus through that sign that's going to shake up and revolutionize topics surrounding your career and your overall life direction, which is what the 10th house represents. So sometimes this can be this can bring up some events that are somewhat unexpected or disruptive with respect to whatever your career has been up until this point, or your life direction has been up until this point. And sometimes we get kind of rebellious and we feel like shaking up the status quo. So you may feel at this time as if there's some things that have been holding you back in terms of things that you've wanted to do with your career and life direction that you haven't been able to do up to this point. But during the course of this transit, you're going to have a more intense feeling like you need to pursue your own destiny and to do things independently, even if it's somewhat disruptive for other people around you, or even if it's somewhat shocking. So ultimately, though, this could be a really good and really positive or very liberating transit in which you develop greater freedom and autonomy when it comes to your career and life direction. So in the second half of this year, starting in July, we're going to get the first initial preview of what that transit is going to be about for the next 7 years, because Uranus is going to dip into Gemini for several months before retrograding and going back into Taurus and back into your 9th house to finish up the transit there. So we're not fully entering this transit yet, but we're going to get an important preview of it starting in July in the second half of 2025. And I would recommend paying attention to any shifts that start happening in your career at this time, because they may have bigger long-term implications than it may seem at first. But ultimately, I think it's going to be great, and it's going to be part of a very exciting 7-year period in your life where things are going to change somewhat dramatically, but probably in a way that's going to be more authentic and is going to take you in the direction that you're supposed to be headed when it comes to your career and your overall life direction. And that's actually a very exciting thing, I think, to begin. So I'm actually excited for Virgo risings this year that you're just now starting this journey of Uranus through your 10th house. So, all right, I think that's it in terms of the major transits that I wanted to touch base on this year. So, those are your major transits for 2025. I've mainly focused on big picture stuff and telling you some of the positive and negative energies during different parts of the year. If you're looking for more specifics, I just released my 2025 electional astrology report, where I go into and I outline a list of the best dates for 2025 for initiating activities and starting new ventures. And people have used my reports in past years to launch major things like getting married, going on a major trip, starting a new business, and other things like that. So the report right now is 20% off because I'm doing a launch sale where you can get it for 20% less than it's supposed to cost all the way through until the first week of January, when the price is going to jump up. So you can get that now at theastrologypodcast.com/2025 report. All right, that's it for this forecast for 2025. So good luck next year, and I'll see you again to do the horoscopes 1 year from now for 2026. All right, take care. I just released my 2025 astrology calendar posters, which show all of the major astrological transits this year at a glance, and you can get those at theastrologypodcast.com/merch. If you want to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I teach an online course in ancient astrology called the Hellenistic Astrology Course, which has hundreds of hours of video lectures where I teach people how to read birth charts and how to understand and predict the future using transits and other timing techniques. So you can find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. Also, shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in May of 2025 in Seattle, Washington, and it's being simultaneously streamed online at the same time. So you can find out more information at norwac.net. Finally, thanks to the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon. You can get early access to new episodes plus other bonus content by becoming a patron at patreon.com/astrologypodcast.